In this lesson, we are going to discuss subqueries and common table expressions, also known as CTEs. What is a subquery? A subquery is a query that appears inside of another query statement. Subqueries are also referred to as subselects or nested selects. The full select syntax is valid in subqueries. You have learned about select syntax in previous lessons. Subqueries are tools for performing operations in multiple steps. You can place the subquery in a number of SQL clauses: the where clause, the having clause, or the from clause. Subqueries can be used with select, update, insert, or delete statements, along with the expression operator. Subqueries are used with operators. It could be the equality operator or the comparison operator, such as greater than, less than, and the like operator. When used with an operator, the subquery is on the right-hand side of the operator. Let us discuss some subquery types. We are going to discuss three types of subqueries, namely expression subqueries, table subqueries, and volatile subqueries. Expression subqueries are used in a query wherever expressions are valid. They return a single value as opposed to a column or a table. We can group this type of subquery further into four different categories. 1. Scalar subquery. 2. Array subquery. 3. Int subquery. 4. Exist subquery. Let's take them one after the other. 1. Scalar subquery. A subquery inside an expression is interpreted as a subquery. Scalar subqueries are often used in the select list or the where clause. Let's dive into some examples. On your screen, you can see this query. The first part of the query has a with statement. The with statement creates the mini table used in this example. That is an example of a common table expression, which we are going to discuss in subsequent lessons. Right. So I have the origin city and destination city selected. If we run this, we can see the origin city. You can see the result of the query. Now, I want to add a scalar subquery that selects the average across the table. Right. We can say number nice. We can see the results of our query. This selects the origin city, destination city, and the average flights column, which is a scalar subquery and is the average number of flights in the table. So let's try something out ourselves. So for this task, I want you to add an extra column to the query, total flights, which is the sum total of all the flights. Compute this with a scalar subquery. Now on my screen, I am going to add the total flights column to the query. The aggregate function to use for a sum total is the sum function, as we have learned in a previous lesson. Now we're going to run this. If you got this, you did a good job. The next category of expression subquery we shall discuss is the array subquery. An array subquery is a special case of expression subquery in that it returns an array. If the subquery returns 0 rows, it returns an empty array and never returns a null array. On your screen, we have the flights table from the previous example. We are going to write an example of an array subquery. So let's get right into it. Select array, and we're going to have the subquery inside. Origin city from flights as origin cities. Now if we run this returns an array of origin cities in a single row. When the array subquery returns no result, then an empty array is returned. Let's see that in action. So I'm going to make a modification to this to return no rows. Now we can say where origin city is equal to Manchester, which doesn't exist in the table. Now we are going to run this, and you can see we have no results returned, just as explained. Now that we have done that, I have a task for you. I want you to select the first 3 cities from the mini flights table as an array. This should evaluate to Philadelphia, Los Angeles, and Detroit. Here's how we'll go about that. So I'm going to remove this filter condition I had that returned an empty subquery. And if we run this, we can see we have the 5 cities returned. To select the first 3, we'll wrap this in parentheses and have 1, 2, 3. Right, so if we run this, it returns Philadelphia, Los Angeles, and Detroit as expected. Now that we have solved that task, if you notice in the task, we use square brackets to access items in an array. By default, PostgreSQL uses 1 base numbering conventions for arrays. That's why we use 1, 2, 3 to get the first 3 items in the array. On your screen, we have the same table used in the previous example. We want to see if Philadelphia is among the origin cities in the table. One way to go about it would be to filter using a where clause, which we've learned in the previous lessons. Another way could be using a subquery. Let me show you how we can do that. Select. I'm going to write a select statement, and I'm going to take an example city, Philadelphia. I'm just going to copy and paste it from the table above, and using the in clause, and here we have the subquery where I'm going to type select origin city from flights. Now I'm going to run this, and you see we have our result as true, which signifies that Philadelphia is in the list of rows returned from the subquery. This is the subquery here. We can make the origin city invalid to see an example of a false case. This, have it run, and yes, there we have it. Now, onto the last type of expression subquery. We have the exist subquery. This type of subquery returns true if the subquery produces 1 or more rows. Returns false if the subquery produces 0 rows. Let's walk through an example. Now, let's walk through an example. On your screen, we can see that Detroit is an example of an origin city. To use the exist subquery, we can type out a select statement, and using exist, and we have the subquery inside, origin city from flights, where origin city is equal to Detroit. Now we can run this and see we have true as an answer. We can also try out an example where we have the result as false by using an invalid city as usual. I can just make some characters, delete some characters here, and running this gives us false. In summary, the exist operator is a Boolean operator that tests for the existence of rows in a subquery. That's all for expression subqueries. We have discussed expression subqueries and the different categories under it. Now, I want to talk about another type of subquery, table subqueries. With table subqueries, the outer query treats the result of the subquery as a table. You can only use these in the from clause. Let's see it in action. On your screen, we have the same table we've used in previous lessons. I want to select from this table, but using a subquery. What I'm going to do is copy the table, delete this that we have. Okay, let me take that again. Flow properly. So on your screen, we have the same table used in previous section. Now, I am going to select from the table as a subquery. What we can do is copy this, write our select statement, a best select statement and from. Now, I'm going to paste this here. What this does is we are going to select from this in parentheses as a table. Now, Postgres is going to treat what we have inside this subquery as a table, and we can give it an alias, say results. Now, I can select results dot origin city, comma, results dot destination city. Now, let's run this. We can see the results showing origin city and destination city. In essence, we can have anything as a subquery and select from it just like we select from a regular table. Let's take a look at a more complex example. We are going to use the flights table introduced in the previous lesson. Suppose you want to find the average number of flights per day between origin and destination cities. We can compute this in steps. First, we find the total number of flights per day for each origin and destination city. Now, on your screen, we have an empty SQL file. I am going to select all rows from the public flights table. Yeah, we have our results here. Now, to select the total number of flights per day for each origin and destination city, I'm going to select the day, cast it as a date, as day, then select the origin city, the destination city, and to count the number of flights for each origin and destination city for each day, I'm going to use an aggregate function. Count star as total flights. Now, since we used an aggregation, I have to do a group by day, origin city, destination city. Now, let's run this. As you can see in the results, we have the day, the origin city, the destination city, and the total number of flights for each day. Right. To select the average number of flights, we can treat these results as a query. Now, to compute the average from these results, we can treat this query as a table. We can do that using a subquery. So I am going to cut this query and select from it. So select from. I'm going to paste the query here. And then I'm going to give it an alias. So let's call it result. Note that using table subqueries, in Postgres, we need to add an alias for each subquery. Now, I can select all rows from this subquery, and it's going to give me the content of this result, just as shown previously. But let's see that in action as well. Right. Now, to compute the average number of flights from each origin city to each destination city, I can type origin, select result, the origin city, results dot destination city, compute using the average aggregates function, average total flights as average flights. Now, since we have the origin city, destination city, and the average flights, we are using an aggregates function. So I can group by results.origin city, results.destination city. No, let's run this. Now we have computed the average number of flights for each origin city and destination city using, you see how we did it in steps. First, we computed the number of flights from each origin city to each destination city for every day. We saw the results of that and we wanted to use the results to compute the average. So we put the query in a subquery and selected from it as if it were a table. Now that's how you use it. Okay, taking it back a bit. Now that's how you use a table subquery. Next up is the third type of subquery mentioned, which is the volatile subquery. A volatile subquery is a subquery that does not always produce the same result over the same input. That is, it is non-deterministic. This occurs when using a function that does not produce the same result every time it is run, like a random number function. Here is an example. On your screen, I'm going to select the origin city and destination city from our flights table. Now, I'm going to use a random number function in Postgres, that's random, which returns a random number between 0 and 1. And I'm going to say where random is less than 0.5. Now, each time we run this, we have a different set of results. But how can we tell that? I am going to do a count, and this is another opportunity to use a table subquery. So we can wrap the results of this query in parentheses. So we say select from, paste the results, as results. Now, to count the total number of rows, we use the count aggregates function, and I can count results star to count all rows, and I can give it the name total. Now, running this, we see we have 22,669. Now, if I run this again, I get another result, 22,429. If I run it again, we get 22,361. This is how volatile subqueries are. When we have a non-deterministic set of rows, the subquery is said to be volatile.